Hey, visionaries. I'm Shalita, the nonprofit Easter O'Neill, and my mission is to help business owners and community organizers launch and revitalize nonprofits that will rebuild their communities. And we're back again for another hashtag nonprofit no filter discussion. And we're going to be talking about wealth building in the Black community and how it can help support Black-led nonprofit organizations. And who better than to have that conversation with than Jamye Wooten. He is the founder of Collectively. Welcome, Jamye.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Always good to be with you.
Yes, thanks for making some time for us today. I know you're super busy. I want to give a little bit more about you before I open it up because I have a whole bunch of questions. So Jamye Wooten is a digital strategist, faith-rooted organizer, and 2015 Social Justice Institute Fellow at Boston University School of Theology. In April 2015, Jamye co-founded Baltimore United for Change, a coalition of grassroots organizations in Baltimore City that organized in response to the death of Freddie Gray. Also, as founder of Collectively, his mission is to be a resource for the greater Baltimore community that seeks to find, fund, and partner with Black social change organizations. So, Jamye, look, the majority of the clients that I work with are Black-led grassroots organizations. And we talk all the time about resource development, how important it is to collaborate, raising funds. And a lot of us find issues, or barriers with raising funds in the community for a lot of different reasons, right, that we'll go into. But tell us more about your work and what you've done in racial justice, economic development, and what you're hoping to create in the Black community.
Sure. Thank you again. I think some of my work began to start out professionally as the director of Collective Banking Group, working with over 200 churches in faith-based economic development in Maryland, D.C., and Virginia. At that time, we had done over about $200 million in loans in the Black community, developing strategic partners with Black businesses, also covenant relationships with banks that would fund our Black churches and faith-based organizations. So that's some of the beginning work of working there, of understanding the power of the collective, understanding the tradition of the Black church, of pulling its economic resources, and then how could we sort of leverage that to build community. So a lot of Collectively work sort of builds off of some of my early professional work at Collective Banking Group. Then in 2015, with the murder of Freddie Gray, co-founded Baltimore United for Change with Leaders of Beautiful Struggle, Algebra Project, Heber Brown, the Black Church Food Security Network. And one of the things we did at that time was create a skills bank. And that was sort of an on-ramp for the folks who weren't necessarily on the ground but wanting to serve. And we had over 260 individuals and organizations join that skills bank from, I'm a mental health provider, I'm a lawyer, I'm a graphic designer. How can I plug in and sort of help during this time? And so sort of Collectively, which I launched in 2019, sort of builds off of the skills bank and some of the work we were doing Baltimore United for Change, and of course, my sort of first professional work as the Collective Banking Group. How do we use the power of collectives to sort of mobilize resources for the benefit of our community?
Absolutely. So what does wealth building truly mean in the Black community? What does it look like? Because I know a lot of times we hear about financial literacy, and it's very basic, right? But it's a lot bigger than that. What is wealth building?
For me, the models I look at are really around cooperatives, collectives. When you look at some of the data, so a lot of people use some of this sort of $1 trillion in Black buying power, right? Which really is just income. It's not really looking at wealth at all. And some of the data says by 2053, Black communities will have zero wealth, right? And so, so for me, the power really is, if we're going to do this work, we're going to have to do it as collectives. We're going to have to do it as cooperatives. That is community-based, owned and controlled businesses, not just jobs. We must look at ownership and making sure that, you so to a certain degree own your job. You have a greater investment in that work as opposed to, again, you're just an hourly worker or a salary worker, but have no ownership. So for me, it's about creating collective ownership for community.
Got it. So, knowing that that's something that needs to happen, but there's so many different obstacles for us doing that. It's so complex, right? And there's historical context around it. But can you tell us what are some of the obstacles that you've seen that, prevents us from pooling our resource and doing those very things that you listed?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I always say, like fragmentation leads to duplication, and duplication leads to wasted resources, time, talent, and treasure. So in Baltimore and in many cities, like we often work in silos, so that those silos keep us from really knowing what maybe others are doing in collaboration. And then it's, trauma and healing. Like there's some real healing that has to go. Like there's a sort of culture of scarcity in America, as opposed to abundance. And so when you're in this sort of, even in this nonprofit sector where we should be fostering greater collaboration, is also a sort of on the foundations, a model that sort of pits organizations against each other. So I always say, if there's 10 mentoring programs that seemingly should be collaborating, if you're all going for the same grant, you might not be sharing notes and sharing best practices.
Right.
What I will say, to give a plug for the Youth Fund, I feel like what they have done as an innovative model is at the highest level of grant opportunity. I think around $200,000 is for organizations that are collaborating. So I think we need models like that in philanthropy that promote collaboration as opposed to these scarcity models. Also, I mean, part of our work from a social network standpoint is really about base building and building relationships. So even the micro grant for me is about trust building, relationship building, so that we can be intentional about how we come together. And so we'll launch probably in 2021 a cohort trying to put together around 10 to 15 organizations and go through a relationship, trust building, healing process before we start talking about issues and what we're going to build together, but really saying, how do we build the type of trust and foundations we need to sustain this work?
Now, let's go back to that, because I mean, we need to spend some more time on, when you say trust, relationship building, that is what I tell my clients all the time too, that, people think, oh, I'm going to go out and I'm going to get a grant writer and they're going to, write a grant for me and everything's going to be wonderful. And I can still stay in my little silo or my, doing my little thing over here. But it's really about, when it comes to fundraising too, psychology and relationship building and trust building. And what does that, I know you're not going to give us the curriculum that you're going to roll out next year, but like, what is sort of your train of thought around how you're going to move folks through, that way of thinking?
I'm actually in the cohort now, a national cohort, with a team of 5 folks in our relational uprising. So you can look at that work. We'll sort of remix it to fit our local context in Baltimore. But it really is sort of going through some of the stories we have been told about ourselves, our culture, these ideas of scarcity as opposed to abundance, the things that make us sort of withdraw and don't really foster collaboration. So we'll spend some time around that and the ability of really talking about the power of social networks. I think that's, when you look at the Black church traditionally, the great resource of the Black church has been a social network that has shared ritual, shared practices, shared principles, right? Those sorts of things for me are the glue that hold decentralized organizations together. So collectively is, in my mind, is a network. And that, I always say Baltimore is a city of generals, right? You're not going to create one organization where we all join. Right. You have to approach this from a network. And for me, from a network standpoint, principles and ideology are the glue that hold decentralized organizations together. But at the foundation of that, to me, is relationships and trust buildings, right? That even trumps the ideology, because if we haven't built the type of relationships that we need, I haven't seen organizations sustain.
Right. So, and I also believe that healing is, it's something that can be done collectively, but it also is something that needs to start on an individual level, because, the systems that we work and live in are so complex, and they definitely have a lot of influence on how we move in the world. But for us to stop and look at what are some of the belief systems that we're holding, or some of the attitudes that we have that really govern what we do, that maybe we can shift. Like, what can someone, I always talk about the personal relationship that folks have with money, also spills out and manifests into their organization or anything that they do. So what can, on an individual level, if someone can start to look at, to shift to then be able to do the other work.
Get a therapist.
Ain't nothing wrong with that.
That's one. Like that's something I've recently done in my life, and I give honor to folks. I think I give honor. I haven't even told him this, but Adam Jackson from Lee's a Beautiful Struggle, who I think he models well, like online, of what this journey has been for him. And I came up in a time in movement spaces where you sacrifice everything. You sacrifice family, you sacrifice everything because we were at war. That was the language, and you sacrificed everything. So I'm thankful for this moment where people are talking more about self-care, taking time off, not always grinding. And so I'm learning those practices as well of how to step back, how to spend more time on myself. And again, meeting with a therapist to make sure, like, we have death and loss, and we just keep moving. I lost a sister and lost family members, and you still grinding, and we're not taking time to mourn and hold grief and deal with that. And so I've been in my own personal life trying to slow down and take those moments and make sure I'm processing, because you can be a justice-oriented person and show up in community with all your mess and all your bag. And that's some of the issues that we start seeing manifest in community. And so that's why I really want to be intentional about the relationship component, the healing component, and then how do we build collectively?
Yes. What does that look like in the nonprofit space too, as a founder, right? When you say self-care, because we've also been raised to pour from an empty cup. Like you're supposed to give, but like you said, then you show up with your mess, and it really influences everything else. Like, what can someone do as grassroots, founder that's running an organization to make sure they're taking care of themselves?
Yeah, I think part of it is just scheduling it, right? So I would work as an entrepreneur from the morning to night. And so what I've been trying to do a lot lately is just to cut things off, taking, like, even my therapist would say, like, can you take 15 minutes in the morning, 15 minutes in the afternoon, and 15 minutes before you go to bed? And so what I've been doing now, I've been taking an hour every morning.
Good.
So I go for a walk every morning, and I feel like I'm much more productive because it's during that time where I'm thinking, I'm clearing my head. I no longer pick up my cell phone as the first thing in the morning.
Hard.
I'm developing a practice to say, like, okay, like, work is going to be there, but make sure that you're taking care of yourself and your health and well-being, or you're not going to be here to do that work.
There you go. And another way that it looks like too is being able to raise money to pay yourself for the work that you're doing. Because a lot of my clients too, when we have that conversation, they're like, oh, I don't know, should I pay myself anything, or how much should it be? Or, there's that conversation about, do they even deserve it? And that's a form of self-care. I mean, you still have a family, you still have responsibilities. And again, you can't pour from an empty cup, and trying to do everybody else.
That's how we might sometimes, as Black founders and leaders in nonprofits, often undercut ourselves. Like, we ask for less. Some of that is just because we don't think they're going to give us what we deserve.
Right.
Also, like, we have to say, like, are we really valuing our time and our talent and what we bring to the table, and making sure that we are asking for what we deserve?
Right. That's another thing too. Yeah. Because we do have, with the historical context, or there have been instances where we've asked for a lot, and we've, and it's like, why would you ask for that? And then we get into the mindset of, well, let me just get this little bit. And then, like we were saying before, we know how to flip it. We can turn it into something, return on investment, but we shouldn't have to always do that. You're right about that. And for me also, I'm being more intentional when I come to the table with my gifts and expertise, to be able to ask for, like you said, what I deserve, and not what I think, oh, that's too much. Let me just, bring it down a little bit. So we can apply that in all areas of our life. So we talked to about, previously before the show, about you said participatory grant making. Like, there's different ways. As we said, philanthropy and the way that it's operating right now is not really working for us in the Black community at all. So tell me more. What is participatory grant making?
Yeah, well, I mean, first, the model collectively sort of is birthed out of some of the sort of national movement work I was doing, and looking at the work of Ella Baker, who often talked about participatory democracy, right? These sort of moving from these sort of hierarchical, messianic, top-down leadership structures to more decentralized models. So she always says strong people don't need strong leaders. And so for me, building a network component, I was looking at more decentralized institutions and what they look like. And what participatory grant making simply looks like is people deciding where funding should go. And for me, from Black-led organization, it's putting those who are most impacted at the center and having decision-making power to decide where funding goes. So we sort of try to model that through our monthly micro grant, where it is a $1,000 micro grant. You submit a 2 to 3 minute video, and then we open it up. We don't decide where the funding goes. The community votes every month. The first year, we had over 20,000 votes cast. So for me, it is, again, and then we have a giving circle that we're piloting this year. Same thing, we're taking memberships to the end of the year, and we'll come together as a collective and decide what are the priorities of the fund, and then where should the funding go. So it's just putting it in the hands of community.
Love it. Love it. We talked a lot too about collaborations and partnerships and being able to build a network, within the Black community. What are some ways that, ways that organizations can identify good partners? Because that's another thing too. It's like, how do you even know who to reach out to? How do you reach out to them? What does that look like?
Yeah, for me, again, everything starts with relationships and trust building. Like I had some folks interested in collectively, some funders early on, and I felt like they were moving me more to like campaign sort of models, and which I think sometimes comes across in our community as transactional. Mm-hmm. So I think to partner and collaborate, like, is it transactional? Because if it's really about transformation and deep relationship, you can take time. And you can put the work in to really build the type of relationships that you need. And the sister say relationships move at the speed of trust, and social movements move at the speed of relationships. Right? Again, relationships being the core and foundational component of any collaboration.
Love it. Love it. Okay. And I wanted to remind everybody too that we can, if you have any questions or comments, make sure you put it in the comment box. And we have Ellie Lamit. Go ahead, and I was waiting for today, listening from Dallas. Great topic. Thanks for joining us. And if you have any questions, we'll take, how we do. We'll take a moment and make sure that we answer any questions that you might have too, because I know I have a whole bunch of questions, but it's really about those who are watching.
You got Dallas, Texas out there. Look at you.
Yeah, Dallas. All right now. Okay. So I want to dig a little bit more too into, because what if there's philanthropists, I always have philanthropists that are going to see this, that are really trying to think differently, and foundations, that are trying to think differently about how they grant funds. And I know we talked about participatory grant making, in different areas or different things that can be done. But what would be your message to them who are, making the decisions? And we talked too about, because hashtag nonprofit no filter, we're going to be real about it. If things were to shift in favor of the Black community or, Black businesses or nonprofits, and that would mean, what was the statistic that you gave? I think it was right now, 96% of funding in Baltimore City goes towards white-led organizations.
The data I recently heard from the Baltimore Community Foundation, yeah.
Yeah, so,
if out of that $60 billion, nationally, Black-led organizations are getting 2% of that.
Right. Yeah. And so that's a systemic thing. That's not just something by happenstance. So what would you say to those organizations who, may not be cognizant of that or aware of that? Like, what could they be doing in addition to the participatory? What else could be done?
Yeah, I had folks during the uprising from foundations reach out who said they weren't familiar or sure who were the Black-led organizations in the community. That's one of the reasons we created the platform, where you now can search organizations based on their area of focus in neighborhoods. So that was one to have but if you don't know, now you know that there are hundreds, of Black-led organizations doing tremendous work in Baltimore. But two, it's really a conversation around power. are you willing to shift power, right? So we can have conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion all day long, but if at the end of the day we aren't shifting resources, right, we really aren't doing much. And I think that's been a lot of the work. A lot of the work has been language change, which is good, right? People are using new language, are studying more about some of the systemic and structural issues that have impacted our community. But now it's about shifting resources, and it's about supporting and help building Black-led infrastructure, right? I think we talked the other day around these ideas of capacity, right? Saying, Jamye doesn't have enough capacity. Like, well, of course we don't. Like, because we know the data. The data says we're only getting 2% of these philanthropic dollars, right? And we know in Baltimore too, it's the history of disinvestment and underdevelopment. And so funders who are serious, right? My saying the foundation is always a partnership, not paternalism. So if you're serious about partnering, then you will pour the type of resources in to Black-led organizations that are self-determined, right? The Black Panthers would say we want Black power, brown power, red power, yellow power, white power, right? The ability, people groups to have the ability to be self-determined, right? But I mean, we have to be honest that there are institutions that are eating off of Black Panthers, right? And so this is not going to be an easy piece. And the goal with collectively is how we shift the center of gravity, where all the power does not lie within the foundation community, but we begin to center our organizations, our institutions, and we shift conversation to self-determined Black-led organizations where we set the agenda for ourselves, and then we are in partnership with the funding foundation community or those individuals of high net worth who want to support Black-led organizations.
Absolutely. And we talked too about, I know a few minutes before we hopped on here, we talked about the ability to fail, right? And you gave some statistics around, or some numbers around, with white-led, companies, investors will give them millions of dollars, like, to fail, pretty much, or it's okay for them to fail. But then for us, what was that? Tell us that again. What? Yeah, we need to hear that.
By the name of Jessica Norwood, who runs Project Runway, where I first heard the data from around, like, Black women-led organizations get about $30,000 in investment, venture capital, and white males are getting about $1 million, right, of Runway. And these are white male, these are failing ventures that are getting $1 million to fail. So we don't get that level of investment that gives us the runway to iterate, pivot, and do whatever we may have to do. And so I always say, like, yeah, you have to give Black-led organizations the ability to fail or to try and to pivot, right? The idea that someone gets a $100,000 grant and they're supposed to change everything in Black Baltimore, like, no, like, we need serious investment, serious dollars to be able to do this work, and the ability to iterate and pivot and even fail.
Yes.
Learn, because, like, again, in this venture capital space, failing is not a bad thing, right? It is how we learn, is how we refine our approach. And so we have to be given that ability as well.
Absolutely. Fail forward, right? Somebody says, but I think that's that's important too. And I think we talked about this too. One of my friends who was actually on, I think it was last week, the week before that, Dr. Alicia Nance talked about, or put me onto, the theory of transformation by a company called Spirit in Action, or organization Spirit in Action. And they talked about the different types of transformation, from reform, where you are working on the system, trying to, change the system, and resist, where you're trying to completely upend the system, or reimagine. There's different ways, and they overlap, and depending on the work, it's not like one person or one thing that we do addresses one issue, but because we're working within the current system, we know how many issues, what's wrong with it, and how we really have to rely on white philanthropists and white organizations to start to shift, like you said, that power dynamic before things will really change within that system. But at the same time, we're also reimagining and recreating what we want it to look like in our communities. Like, what is that? What does that look like when we're trying to do those things at the same time?
Yeah, for me, is, first starting with the end goal, right? So for me, it's important that we're starting with, Reverend Albert Clegg would say, we want power, right? So that we look at everything through the lens of power, even if it's reform. Like, we're clear that we want to be self-determined. So I'm thankful for folks who I know who are in some of these philanthropic spaces that aren't perfect spaces, but I know who are trying their best to reimagine and redeploy dollars, and so that you can sustain Black-led organizations for us to do this work. So I think for me, again, it's important that we, particularly in this moment, like what I think my anxiety is the co-optation of language, whether it be Black-led, Black liberation, Black power, Black Lives Matter, right? I think people, again, language is shifting, so a lot of folks are using language, but we all might not have the same end goal. And so you still might get a lot of status quo things or symbolism that doesn't move us to power. So for me, I keep my eyes on power and the ability to be self-determined. Even as you do your reform, even as you work with inside systems, you should be trying to move to a place where people are self-determined.
Absolutely. And we talk too about, when we come within our community too, when you talk about leadership, there's a responsibility that comes with that. And sometimes, we have some people who kind of aren't interested in the leadership piece. They want to kind of be seen, and not at the detriment of the collective. Like, how does that show up, and how can we address that?
Say that again.
So, leadership within our community, right? With, I know we were speaking before, and you said there is a responsibility as a leader, right, that you have as part of the collective to always make sure that you are communicating the voices of the group, right? And it's not just a thing where you are out here on your own on the backs of everybody else without really collaborating, right? And we do that to each other in our community. How do we recognize that or call that out? Like, how do we address that?
Yeah, again, for me, that comes back to relationships, right? When you're in a relationship and you're accountable to community, then you don't play the gatekeeper role, right? Or the role that sometimes folks are. And Dr. King talked about this, right? That he was beginning to see new leadership emerging within the Negro community that was not sort of birthed and nurtured within the community, right? So what would happen is folks outside of the community would uplift and raise Black voices and folks and finance their campaigns and move them forward. And those individuals weren't necessarily accountable to the Black community. So for me, it's about, are you in relationship and who are you accountable to? And if you aren't accountable to Black-led organizations, the Black community, then you really can't be a Black leader. And so we have folks I heard someone say leading Blacks, Black leaders and leading Blacks. And so some folks are just pushed into leadership based on visibility, exposure, right? And by default, we consider them leaders without sometimes asking them, who are you accountable to? I think that's important. Like, people can call me and hold me accountable. Right. And that should be how this is going. That you're not a lone ranger and that no one can pull your coattails and say, like, you out of pocket on that. If you represent community, yeah.
True. And it's okay too. They say that in order for you to be an effective leader, you also have to know when to follow. It's a give and take thing. It's not like, all of us have our own sets of expertise. And even though, again, it's complex, and it's a reason why, with mental oppression and all types of things where we feel like we're always in competition with each other. But when we start to look at it like, hey, I'm unique. I've got, expertise. I've got something to bring to the table, and so do you. And that's okay. Like, there is no competition.
That's what I love about Ella Baker and the ideas around participatory democracy. I think they're more holistic. I think they allow people to shine in their own gift and talent. We don't need one person. It also gives us the ability to rest. Like, I don't have to do all that.
Right.
I can say, no, this should leader lane. Like, talk to your leader. I'm going to play basketball. Like, there's enough work for us to do. And the beauty is there's enough expertise that no one person, no one organization has to do it all. And when we get back to that part we talked about earlier, just about health and self-care, it's better off for my well-being not to be considered one person, right? But that there's brilliance and genius within the collective.
Absolutely. And it's that sort of having to be the only one or the smartest one, or, is a Western way of thinking. It's not. When you talk about, historically our African culture or ancestry, it was always about mind, body, spirit aligned. And when we are fragmented now, because we've broken those different pieces up, because in Western culture or Western society, it's completely separate. That's why we're seeing so many effects of the trauma and just the breakdown of our community, because that's not how we operate. Like, there's always somebody, like you said, I tell my clients too, look, the beauty of being able to delegate. And if you're going to, it goes hand in hand with relationship building too. If you're going to build your tribe and your network, you're going to trust folk to be able, you bring them on to do something, trust them to be able to do that thing. And it may not look the way you would do it, but that's okay, because they still have that expertise, and you get an opportunity to, like you said, rest, and work on other things and be the visionary. Right. But when you're trying to be in the weeds and you're wearing 12, 15 different hats because you just, have to be in control of things, or not trusting, like you said, then that hurts you more than it helps.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to be productive, and it's just easy for me from a movement background. It's not even, to me, the most sophisticated way to move. And so one of the books I got to before I got to Ella Baker was a book called The Hidden Negro in Charge Syndrome. The same thing, looking at these sort of hierarchical top-down models, right? And so it's like you cut off the head, you kill the movement. So my whole early childhood, you growing up, they're saying, well, who's the next Martin? Who's the next Malcolm? As opposed to, like, there are many.
Mm-hmm.
There are many of us, and so there's no one leader we're looking for. There's genius and beauty and intelligence in all of us, and we need to nurture that community.
Yes. And we're seeing a lot of Black businesses that are especially, the COVID has been a blessing and a curse to many in a lot of different ways, but there have been people who have been more creative about their talents and expertise, and they've been able to monetize it. So, like, how do we, and now we're being, because of the unrest and because of, the different ways that we're seeing white companies show up, that we call it cancel culture. We kind of, fed up at this moment, and we've been putting our dollars into Black businesses. How do you see us sustaining that? What does that, because we're talking about wealth building in the Black community, and a lot of that too is about businesses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the things we do with the monthly micro grant is, when you submit this 2 to 3 minute video, you must integrate a principle. So we use the rules of Saba, the 7 principles of Kwanzaa. And so we're trying to get people in a mindset that what I call beyond reactivism. So this idea that I have around Ella Baker is called MLK to Baker, beyond reactivism, organizing for power, right? So a holistic model of what community building looks like beyond reactivism, beyond the Black Death. How do you sustain movements? Because we see it, right? There's always this high moment where everybody is excited and they're enthusiastic. Then the media narrative changed, right? So you go from George Floyd to Kanye West to Donald Trump. And now that march that you planned yesterday, you don't have 10,000 people anymore. You might have 100 people, because the media has shifted. And so how do you maintain a holistic approach to this work? And for me, it is centering principles, it's centering values, that this becomes a way of life, not in reaction to white supremacy, racism, but that we're proactive about how we're trying to build and sustain community.
Absolutely. And you said the media, because there's so many different things that attack our own thinking on how we look at ourselves and how we look at each other and community, and media is one of those things. Like, how can people not be misled? Like, what are some of the things that they need to look out for, that they can, when they see an article that says one thing, what should they be doing to educate themselves so they're not misled?
Yeah, one, I think we have to have our own platforms, and we have to tell our own stories. I think that's important. And I think as I tell my children, like, you have to watch TV, like, thinking. You watch it critically, right? It's important to know, like, well, who are they uplifting? Like, for me, from what we talked about leadership, I'm constantly seeing new faces of Black folks pushed before us. I'm wondering who they are. If they, like, when Cory Booker ran for first mayor, then senator. I'm talking to my friends in Newark.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter like what he's saying on national platforms. It matters like what is the community saying? What is the community in California saying about Kamala Harris? Like it's important that we sort of dig deeper beyond what is the community saying about the mayor of Washington, D.C. Like those, so there's a narrative around Black Lives Matter in the street and what that is, the symbolism of that. But then there's also a real critique of activists that live in D.C. on the current mayor in D.C. And so we can get caught up in the symbolism when we aren't in relationships with community and folks on the ground doing the work.
Absolutely. So, politicians too. We're talking about, uplifting the Black community, wealth building, and the Black community. A lot of this goes back to policies and how things are, how people are voting, and so how should one look at getting involved in politics, or building relationships with their local legislators or politicians? What should that look like in the scale of building up the Black community?
Yeah, I think it's looking and following the lead of folks who are doing this work. So for me in Baltimore, I closely follow the work of Leaders of Beautiful Struggle and their work. They have been on it since I've known them when they were students at Towson University, and they're still on it. And I think it's important to follow folks who are doing the research, who are studying and building the relationships and are advocating on our behalf, and working in coalition and partnership with folks who are doing the work to advance public policy that builds power and wealth in our community. Like they are very instrumental to the creation of the Youth Fund. Well, not the creation of the Youth Fund, but the way in which the Youth Fund was rolled out to make sure that a racial equity lens. And so I think it's important to get involved, not just in politics, because sometimes we vote and we go home.
Right.
It was important to be involved with public policy organizations that are doing this work, that are doing the research in season and out of season to a point, not just when voting season is in, but 365 days of the year when policies and agendas are being proposed that you might not be aware of.
Right. And what do you say to those who have been, just discouraged by, Baltimore City? We got a lot of issues with, in politics and our legislators and things like that. Like for those who have become disenfranchised or who are just like, I'm just done with it, what would you say to them?
Yeah, I mean, it could take a toll on you. One, if they turn the TV off, I think what's depressing a lot is like local media, right? That starts with a narrative that to give an example, right? This was the 5th year looking at the death of Freddie Gray of the Baltimore uprising, right? So it's been 5 years. Baltimore Sun reached out to me, a journalist, about sort of what's been happening 5 years post Freddie Gray. And she's and collectively in the work I was doing. And so I told her about Leaders of Beautiful Struggle and the Baltimore Children and Youth Fund, and Daniel's Terrain going to Open Society Foundation, Heber Brown and the Black Church Food Security Network, Tawanda Jones still doing West Wednesday. I think she's about six years, probably the longest going protest in the nation, if not the world. Like she's been consistent with West Wednesday, the Baltimore Ceasefire, the Black Arts District, right? So there's a lot emerging within the community, right? Journalists at Baltimore Sun decided not to tell any of that story, and went with the narrative of like many things started, but few remain. Decided, so even though I gave a story after story after story of Black-led organizations, the work that have started since Freddie Gray and still emerging, and the disinvestment, underdevelopment, and how we often go unnoticed and under-resourced.
Yeah.
She kept the same narrative. And so I think it's important sometimes to turn the TV off. And we have to tell our own stories. And join community. If you're not involved, because I think you get more depressed when you aren't involved in community. So I say get involved in community, link up with like-minded people, and get to work.
Yes. And it could be so simple as, I always say, seek out those, like you said, organizations who are either like-minded or they are doing work that complement the work, the mission of your organization, and go support them. You know, if they're having a fundraiser, if they're having an event or something, go to the event, support them, and then reach out to them afterwards to see if you can sit down and have a conversation. You know, I always tell folks, if you ask for money, you're going to get advice. If you ask for advice, then you end up getting money, because you end up getting connected to people who are really about the work. And it's less about, oh, I want to get this grant, and more about, I want to be a part of moving things forward. So you have to come out of your shell, y'all, nonprofit visionaries. Like, I don't have time to do this. I don't. Once you actually build a team around you that you can trust, and you delegate, you know, so that'll free you up to be able to sit on some of those committees, find out, you know, what are the conversations. If you're in education or housing, you need to be a part of these housing committees. You need to reach out to local, state, you know, agencies that are responsible for housing, and see, you know, how they engage their stakeholders. You really have to seek out opportunities to build relationships. They're not just going to fall in your lap. You know, and the thing, you know, the way that things work too, go back to philanthropy, even though the system is completely flawed, and we're seeing that more and more now, but, you know, funders talk to each other. They also talk to their grantees. So if there is an organization, a grassroots organization that's getting funding, and they've built up that rapport in the community and with their funder, know that if you're applying for funding from them, they're probably going to ask their grantees too about you. You know, they want to, you know, wait a minute, I got this proposal from this organization. How are they, you know, or do you know about them? Are you connected with them? Can you vouch for them? A lot of that goes on too. So if you are just, like you said, Johnny come lately, right, Jamie, like nobody, we just see you and you ain't on you know, on the ground doing the work, or in, you know, in the trenches, doing the work, then it's like, okay, can people really vouch for you? So being intentional about that.
That's right.
Yeah. And I also want to go back to how some of the oppressive, or, you know, systems and nonprofit can manifest, and because sometimes we don't really acknowledge it, or we don't really recognize it. But something you said earlier too, when we talk about measures of success and outcomes, or we talk about qualitative versus quantitative, and all those different things that funders look for, and they expect those things to happen within 12 months, you know, or 18 months, and money is attached to, you know, you're talking about, you know, a population that needs a lot of support, and you're supposed to get them financially literate. They're supposed to have stable housing. They're supposed to be healed in 12 months, so that when you write your report, you can say, oh, I don't work with 1,000 people and they're all healed and everything within 12 months. And it does not work that way.
It does not.
You know, it's just another way of that, how that inequity is built in the expectations around what's supposed to happen with our population. So, you know, it's difficult, because you still, if you have funders who have that expectation, you still have to, in some way, try to compromise. But I think, you know, is there a way to educate from if you're getting funding, right? Because then there's that dynamic. Is there a way to educate the funder?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, partly, again, what we're trying to do in our role is sort of shift that narrative. The fact that our grants are unrestricted, no strings attached grants, is saying, like, yeah, you can give Black folks $1,000 unrestricted and let them do, and they're going to do the work, right? Where in a system where you might have to fill out 10 pieces of paper and tell everything you did and how you used it, you know. So we say, no, it's $1,000. It's unrestricted. You know, if you have to pay your rent with it. If you need to go to spa, you go to spa with it, right? I always say we're investing in impact. We're investing in people that they've been doing this work. They would have done this work with the $1,000, without the $1,000. Like, and so if that $1,000 helps you catch up, or go get a logo you always wanted to get, or take a weekend that you need,
yeah,
you owe that to yourself too. As you talked about earlier, sometimes we pour in from these empty wells. And so I don't want the grant to say, oh, it only can be used for work.
Mm-hmm.
It has to be restricted in a way that doesn't allow me a moment to step back and breathe. And so in that sense, we're trying to be somewhat disruptive in the system and saying, yeah, we can give Black folks $1,000, invest in or more money than that, obviously, but saying invest in impact. Then you go get the data. So all the data you want, invest in, start with impact, because what we see happen is folks who are nonprofit professionals who write very good grant proposals, who can check all the boxes, but don't have impact. The community can't vouch for their impact. So invest in impact, and then let's go get data.
You better say it again. There's a different impact, right? It's not just about trying to be out here to, and I did a video on this too, do you want to be seen or do you want to have an impact? And those are very different things. And not to say that you can't have an impact and be seen, but sometimes the motivation behind each of those is really different. You have to look at, where are you coming from with it, right? Because that is ultimately, and that's why I started, when I referenced earlier the theory of transformation, I started sharing that with people, with the spirit in action. And my clients, we start off with that. And I ask them, like, where do you fall in this, in this continuum? And because you have to be intentional and revisit, why am I doing this work? Because it's so easy to be distracted, and it gets stressful at times, and then you're like, I just, you feel like you should be further than where you are, and then you're ready to just stop. But if you look and always, and that's with anything, remember your why and remember how you're actually going about reaching impact, and knowing that impact takes time, Jamie, right? It's not like, oh, you go, okay, well, I'm going to give this 6 months or a year. Sure. It takes years for impact. You gotta, you have to stick with it.
Yeah, and it's data out there too, as well, that we get less sort of unrestricted dollars, multi-year dollars, right? So those are some of the things that foundations of philanthropy can do, right? Of saying Black-led organizations need more unrestricted dollars, and they need multiple year commitments so that they can grow. Like if you get $50,000 this year that is restricted, and you have no idea what 2021 looks like, that could be stressful trying to build out your program. So we need more unrestricted dollars that allows the creative genius of our community to build out their vision for their business, as well as multiple year commitments that sort of alleviates the stress and allows for long-term planning.
Yes. Yes. And I mean, in any philanthropist or foundation funder can actually do that, I would encourage them to look at who they're granting to. Like you said, the number is 96%, of funding. And is it Baltimore or Maryland?
That's Baltimore. That was what I heard from Baltimore Community Foundation.
Yeah. So according to the Baltimore Community Foundation, 96% of funds that have been granted in Baltimore have been to white-led organizations. So I think it's quite easy if for those philanthropists or funders who want to actually look at this and address it within their own organizations or systems, they can just start there and look at, well, who are you granting to? How much of your money, is it really diverse? And why, if you're not granting, which we, according to the numbers, probably not, if you're not being equitable in how you're giving out funding, why?
Right.
Why is that?
We talked earlier about these sort of networks as well, right, that exist. And so what does that mean too within the network, where if we flip those numbers, right, in a majority Black city and said 96% of funding goes to Black-led organizations, now it means, right, white-led organizations who are eating off of sort of building their programs off of this sort of foundation and dollars, they are now looking for access to capital, access to funding, right? And so as part of that, like, what are you willing to do to disrupt a system and a network and existing relationships and portfolios to shift power in a way that is just?
Right.
Simply just, right, in a majority Black city that helps build out, like, that Black-led organizations should be centered in doing the work in their community, and then how do we shift those resources in a just and righteous way?
Yeah.
That's conversation.
That's a whole other
power and shifting power. So we can do like diversity, equity, inclusion, and say, how do we talk nicer and use new terminology? But if we don't see resources shifting, we begin to know like who's serious and who's not.
Yep. Yep. And another thing that comes up that irks me a lot is the program versus admin percentage, right? Within nonprofit organizations, the expectation that like 90% of your funding should go towards programs and 10% or less should go towards operating, when if you don't have the funds to pay people's salaries, then you're not going to be able to run the program.
That's right.
Like where does that come from, and what type of thinking is it that if your organization has a certain percentage going towards salaries? But that only applies, it doesn't necessarily apply to white organizations, right? It's really, we notice that Black-led organizations, we're held more to that than other organizations. So Shay Watkins says, sorry I'm late. Let me show this. You are really late. We're about to wrap it up. But did you have any questions? I want to, take a moment now for those of you who are watching. If you have thoughts, questions, listen. Jamye is busy and he is out here doing some real work in the community. So if you have questions for him around this, go ahead and put your questions in the comment box, and I'll make sure I ask him. But while we're waiting for that, Jamye, tell us more about what Collectively has going on. Is there any upcoming events, anything that how people can get involved?
Sure. So upcoming soon is August the 7th is our Collective Give. So it's a 24-hour day of giving. So I always say it's sort of our Give Tuesday for Black-led organizations. In Baltimore, we have now roughly about $15,000 in prizes. So we'll give out prizes throughout those 24 hours. Whoever has the most donors this hour, whoever raises the most money this hour. So we'll give prizes to incentivize folks throughout the day. But really, again, trying to be a resource for those that seek to find, fund, and partner with Black-led organizations serving in Baltimore. Then we'll start some of our speaker series work in the fall. We'll do our Collective Soup, which is sort of crowdfunding and crowdsourcing nonprofit organizations. So organizations have the ability to sort of pitch and share their idea. We'll sort of crowdfund resources and crowdsource. So folks who are in the community who may say, look, I can help you with that. I can help you with branding. I can help you with marketing. I can help you with this. So we'll start some of that work as well. And of course, we're going to launch this cohort. So we're looking for about 10, 12 organizations that will sort of take through a cohort process to deepen relationships, deepen trust, and see how we might work together.
Absolutely. So those nonprofits, but in particular Baltimore, right? Baltimore City. So
Baltimore County.
Okay, so if you're in Baltimore County, and you are a nonprofit Black-led grassroots organization, and you need some support, and want to be a part of this and apply for the cohort, you need to reach out, right? Collectively.org. To check in and see how you can get connected. And also, is this, if people just wanted to connect with you, Jamye, they can go ahead and use collectively.org.
Or hello@collectively.org as well as email.
Hold up, I'm gonna put it in there. hello@collectively.
And we'll be launching our skills bank too in the fall. So that is sort of a LinkedIn type of platform where you can connect with other skilled professionals and resources, from fellowships to grant opportunities.
All right, Kelly, don't act like you don't listen. Reach out if you need the support, and to get connected too, because we're talking about community, we're talking about networks. And one last question for you, Jamye, too, because there may be others and other, because we talked about this too, that this is just for Baltimore City, Baltimore County, being how important it is to focus in on a specific location. But there might be people that are watching from different states, and they're like, wow, I wish I had something like this. Like, what would you say to them? How could they either plug into what you're doing and, learn how they can partner to bring it to where they are, or what should they do?
Yeah, definitely reach out to me. We've been contacted by folks in Durham, North Carolina, Chicago, Philly, even internationally, of places that are interested in the platform. So our goal is to go through our 6 phases. We'll go through our 6 phases of development by 2021, and then we'll be looking at opportunities to expand to other cities as well. So yeah, please reach out. And we, it's place-based. So we believe in place-based. We believe in community, local relationships. And so we want to seed it with folks who are accountable to their local community.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Jamye, for spending time with us and having this very real hashtag nonprofit no filter conversation. I know some of the things we talked about can be touchy, but I really feel like personally it has been my passion and my work to be able to help Black-led grassroots organizations, because I know what it's like to try to really work really hard to get the support that you need. And even though, I've gotten a lot of support, at the same time, when you look at in comparison, it's really, and so I think we really need to network to make sure we have the information we need to build capacity from the inside out. So yes, so y'all don't be afraid to reach out to Jamye. I'll put it up one more time, okay? And I spelled it right? Because I'll be wanting to put the E and the O in there.
Yeah, that's right.
hello@collectively.org. And y'all know if you need one-on-one coaching, nonprofit coaching, you starting up, you're not quite sure where to go or how to make it happen, y'all know you can reach out to me at shalitaoneal.com. Let me put that up there for you. Make sure that you book your 1-hour consultation with me. Don't be shy. And if you're looking at this on Facebook, make sure you like my page, because we're doing this every week now. Subscribe if you're looking at it on YouTube, and share it. Do not keep us a secret. If this topic blessed you or gave you information that you didn't have before, make sure you share it with someone else. All right. And then next Tuesday, August 4th, 12 p.m. Eastern, we're going to be discussing getting the attention of the media around your nonprofit's cause. And our special guest is going to be Melody Graves McKinley. She is a senior producer at the Black News Channel and producer at TV One. So for those nonprofits who have been like, I really want to, I don't know how to reach out to the media, or I want to be able to share more about my organization, and bring all those questions, because she's going to be here to answer them next week. And until then, be real, have fun, but get results. See y'all.